involved from the beginning on Dredd is what every artist in the VFX industry wants to do.
In fact, we got involved before even the director and the DOP or art director came on board. We were basically working with the producers and the writer Alex Garland on building up concepts for the film.
And we didn't feel that we could kind of do this in the more conventional, this department that feeds into that one, and we very much wanted to create a sort of fluid flow of ideas and thoughts.
So we could basically influence their ideas and the design of the film from the very beginning.
So, the collaboration between writer and the visual development people very early on in terms of, kind of looking at how we might adjust the script in order that, we could deliver the visual element to the budget.
Alex was a comic book fan, and he was in touch with John Wagner and a few of the others from the comic book creators. He was always showing them the concept work that we were doing along the way. In addition, they developed their own concept work quite early on.
When I first came onto Dredd, the script we were given was in fact a storyboard script which had been drawn by Jock. It was a cartoon, sketchy style, but it explained the movie very well in visual terms, and it was really great help for us developing it further.
We were very much in sync with them and trying to work out a way of bringing Dredd to the screen.
They were very clear about what they wanted. They wanted a gritty, real, brutal film, much like the original 2000 AD comic.
The original comics had a lot of different artwork in them, and there's no sort of set sort of look to Megacity. But what Alex wanted to do is make this feel like a very real place.
And one of the things we tried to do was to not make the buildings look like they belonged to the very distant future, and not to have technologies that didn't really feel like they belonged in our world. We wanted to have a kind of elastic band attached to this moment in time, so that even though it was the future, it felt like it was connected, and that people could empathise with these hard urban blocks in which people live.
We'd already done some research with Alex, and we developed some concepts which kind of showed Megacity as we wanted it. In particular, one sort of iconic picture that Neil Miller had done of the skate park and the view of Megacity.
That was the first one that kind of was a breakthrough design. Everyone cottoned onto it, and it was a lot of the buildings on that were then used for the basis of design for the rest of the city. When I originally did that, it didn't have the Empire State Building in it. We put that in there as a scale reference. By putting that in there, we figured out that some of the buildings were about 800 metres tall, which equated to 200 floors, and so it was the key design. We designed about 11 buildings in total and scattered them throughout the cityscapes.
Mega blocks, mega highways, Mega City 1.
We wanted to shoot Megacity, and we wanted our foreground for Megacity, as much as possible, we wanted that to be real and shot on real location. So we were looking for a sort of fairly grungy city.
We were drawn to Johannesburg because it felt to us that it had this sort of grid structure to its streets that perhaps we could pass that off as a kind of New York alternative. We'd use basically the real city, we got our helicopter shots and everything, and then we'd put our mega blocks and highways and things into that.
The signs look similar. The road markings, the traffic lights. So there's not a lot of dressing to do, and actually we didn't do hardly any, so we could just film a foreground in Johannesburg or Cape Town and it will look like an American city.
There was a lot of 70s brutalist architecture there anyway. There's one shot panning across a cityscape, and we have one big mega block right in the foreground. The rest is just buildings added away in the background. The rest is left as is, and it looks Dredd-like, concrete, brutal, hard, and good.
So what we're doing is we're actually integrating our CG into a real environment, and it helps us to ground our visual effects very much in the real world.
Because it's a pretty hard, rough, city in itself, it really lent itself to kind of the aesthetic that we were trying to achieve in the film.
One of the end shots in the film is the wide shot from the air of Megacity 1. When I did the original concept of that, Alex Garland, he said it looked like gravestones in the mist, and they really liked that concept and they signed off on that. So that went on to the final matte painting in the film, which is virtually all CG. There was no plate for that shot, so we added cars, the buildings, and basically it's made up.
It was decided to shoot the film in stereo fairly early on. As a group, we were at first a little bit worried about it. We were fairly low budget, And adding stereo into the mix eats into that budget quite a lot.
We didn't have a huge amount of experience with stereo. Anthony, Don Mantle, the DP, I think it was his first project using stereo.
We sat down with them and said, these are the supposed rules for stereo. You mustn't do this, you mustn't do that.
And he just didn't, it's like, no, I'm going to, I don't want to adhere to that particular rule. I'm going to try.
So what I'm personally interested in this film as far as space and texture and detail is concerned is informing less than what most trends in 3D are doing at the moment in cinema, are trying to inform, trying to show what we can do, trying to see, look at all the layers. I know the layers are important, but I try and work with space in really in a more metaphysical way.
He really was able to kind of push what we were able to get out of stereo.
The first time I shot 3D was testing for this film. I was horrified when I saw the rigs. I was horrified when I saw the camera. They're big and they're cumbersome. Out of that potential restrictive physical aspect of shooting in 3D develops a kind of idea that we can do something different. I'm not in the least bit interested in gimmicks. I'm interested in what depth is about.
Anthony wants to do something different with the 3D. He wants to really feel it. He wants it to be enveloping in the story and quite natural. We want it to be realistic. He's particularly keen in looking at close-ups in 3D, which I don't think is normally done. Most people are obsessed by wide shots or things coming out of the screen. Anthony's really interested in looking at people's faces. And he's even developed this brand new camera with Paradise, the guys who supplied the equipment for the film, so that he can handhold, which I don't think has ever been done in 3D before.
We've kind of come up with something that enables me basically to go very close, and I think things like faces become landscapes in a different way, and they are officially 3D. So I love that.
We've also used in this film a new Phantom camera, the Phantom Flex, which is a high-speed camera that can record at a frame rate of over 3,000 frames. Normally you shoot at 24, that's what you see in the cinema. This is recording 3,000, so it's incredibly slow. It's slower than the slowest sports photography. And we've done that in a 3D rig as well.
The slow-mo was very important to this film. It was identified by Alex very early on as being one of his main concerns.
One of the things about very extreme slow motion is that it can make almost anything look beautiful and hypnotic and graceful.
We did some previews early on where we put together a whole slow-mo sequence, and it kind of worked with music and sound effects. It became quite interesting. It was just a question of then designing the shots for the sort of people being shot. So what we actually did was, with special effects guys, we got some blood bags and some prosthetic people and shot them up. So when we went in to design the shots, we knew exactly what we wanted the blood to look like. For instance, we wanted it when we shot someone's cheek and the blood comes out. We want to see it, this sort of stringy, beautiful stuff going through the air. So the idea behind that was to somehow make the violence look beautiful or sort of surreal in a way.
Shooting in slow-mo means a lot of trial and error process, because the actions you're shooting are happening so fast that you can't really see it before you've recorded it.
None of us understand what happens at 4,000 frames a second. The whole idea is to have really graceful deaths, so it has to be beautiful. And the blood becomes, with the correct lighting on it, you get this beautiful red streaks of ribbons flying through the air. And yeah, it doesn't look gory at all, it's really pretty.
I've kind of developed this multi-layer section in slow motion. The idea is not just to shock people and say, wow, but it's to try and give them complex images, sounds and movements that mess with their brains, so they feel they're looking at something they don't really want to look at, but it's strangely beautiful, so they look. And I find that very interesting artistically to explore that. And 3D is interesting for me in that respect.
Roll camera, please.
The other sort of ethos behind the way we shot this was shoot as much as possible with the cameras and get the unexpected stuff. And if it doesn't work, we'll do it in the CG later, which will inevitably end up a bit more choreographed, but at least you've tried. So, for instance, we tried to explode the door and that didn't work, and we redid that in CG. We tried to get a muzzle flash, it didn't really work, so we redid it. Obviously, we can't shoot someone's cheek off, that has to be done in CG. But a lot of the other stuff, the rippling stomach, that's real. What we were doing was we were shooting compressed air at someone's stomach, and that's what it really does. And we were trying to mimic the idea of an explosion, the force of an explosion, with compressed air. In addition, the guys that are being shot, we blew compressed air at their bodies to sort of get an initial impact and also get a reaction from the actor so that they could perform. So all that stuff, it was carefully worked out. At the same time, we were very keen to get something something unexpected in the live action.
Sir, if you leave it to me, he doesn't have to speak.
The other one was inside Kay's head. You know, we thought, well, there's a moment where we could do something slightly different as well. And that one, we kind of disconnected him from his background, the opposite of what you're supposed to do with stereos. So we're kind of making him feel much more isolated from where he's supposed to be, which is inside his head, a very dark, empty space. So there were sort of creative sequences in the film that we could really exploit the use of 3D in this film.
Defense noted.
Very early on, we were sitting in a script development meeting, and Alex was explaining how he wanted to see Mama hit the deck, super slow-mo, and to create something that we'd never seen before.
That was also a complicated scene that we prevised. The idea was to make this very kind of poetic ending to Mama seeing through the surreal point of view of the drug effect that she'd just been forced to take. But one of the things that wasn't really sort of worked out in that particular scene was how she was going to die.
It's this thing about doing something that, quite frankly, is disgusting. Someone's face hitting the floor right in front of us, and somehow trying to make that look beautiful and enticing. And we just leapt into it and trusted our instincts that we would be able to do something cool with that.
At the end, when she's hitting the floor, again, Alex Garland asked me to have a look at some of those frames and come up with a kind of painterly look.
We went sort of halfway house, so we kind of split the head open and then kind of pulled focus on the shot and covered it with blood so that it felt a lot more surreal and less visceral and in your face.
Guess it felt like a long way down.
Probably our biggest CG work in the film is the atrium. That was our biggest asset and was probably in the most shots that we did. There was a corner piece of set that was built, just 3 floors high and half the width of the supposed width of the atrium.
This represents a quarter of our atrium, so the building is 4 times the size of this, so that balcony would be twice as long over there.
And we effectively used that to create all 4 corners, and we just kept redressing it and shifting it and moving it.
Of course, we were shooting off it all the time, and we had to extend that. What we tend to do with our CG is to build our asset as much detail as possible, but we couldn't possibly build it for every single circumstance in this film because it's 200 floors and every floor is different, and we're not going to build that into our CG. Quite often we would finish off those shots with what we call paint and reproject, which is whereby we actually render the CG atrium, and then instead of building new assets for that floor, we would maybe paint some shop signs and then reproject and re-render that.
We just came up with ideas to break into it and make it more interesting. We added a hospital block at the bottom of the atrium, ledges, lights, and different things just to break up the monotony.
Just generally sort of mix up everything as we went through the various different scenes in the film.
The overriding experience for me for Dredd is working on a project from the very beginning, literally with just sitting with a script, with not a lot else at that time, through to the very, very last final of the film, and working closely with the directors, the writers, and the production team. That was a great experience.
What comes out of it for me is just the aesthetic tightness. When you see the film, it feels like somewhere that makes sense. So like the interiors and the exteriors and the various sort of design aspects of the film all kind of line up quite neatly, I think, and it feels like a real place.
Certainly this is a film that I think punches way above its weight. I mean, it really, when you look at what we had available to us and actually what we've achieved, I think people would be very surprised if we were to ever reveal really how much money we spent in actually making this. The world of Dredd is incredibly rich and complex, and it would be really nice to sort of continue with that.